Ah, suddenly I'm just really sleepy. So DIY, the do-it-yourself aesthetic, is really central to the punk aesthetic and to punk rock. And when I think about punk, I think of Dungeons and Dragons. Because you gotta connect it to the theme or you lose points. But there was actually a connection between them for me, because I grew up in northern Indiana in the late 80s and early 90s, when the satanic panic was going on. And so everyone was afraid of punk and metal and hip-hop and fantasy and horror and Dungeons and Dragons and all these things that Tipper Gore was railing against, as though we would forget about it in 2000. So, and there was even that sort of DIY thing with punk. It's the idea that if you have something to say, you just pick up an instrument and you make it happen. You just figure it out. And that's what role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons are in general. You have just this scaffolding, and you make your own story. You have your own adventure. You figure out what the monster is and what you're trying to get away from. But I was in northern Indiana. I was this little kid in this space that was kind of really conservative and frankly kind of strange. And so like my teachers would see me with the D&D books because I'd be reading them between classes and walking around. And I remember once my teacher stopped me and said, like, "Oh, you gotta be careful about that stuff. It can really like suck you in and you can get a little too deep into it." And I was like, none of this is real? This is about pirate ships flying through the sky? It can't happen. P.S. You're telling me this in a town that used to have the highest population of Ku Klux Klan members in the nation. Maybe that's the thing we shouldn't get too far into or get sucked up in. Although on reflection, maybe it's not a surprise now that that teacher, the history teacher, also skipped over slavery and the civil rights movement in her lessons because we've already talked about that enough anyway. Wow. Oh, this is where I am. So when I got to high school, my friends and I, we were all into these games. We'd have to like skulk around and like find places to hide to play the games, like to play Magic the Gathering and whatnot, because our teachers were always like, "No, this stuff's dangerous, devil work and whatnot." But it was also a weird environment. I had a high school teacher who, she lived right on the county line. So if you looked at the map, the black line, that's exactly where her house was. And she was really proud of this. She would brag about it because it meant she didn't have to pay county taxes. And specifically, it meant she couldn't go to the library. She bragged about this. Our teacher was like, "Yeah, I can't go to the library because I don't pay taxes for them. I can't go to that place with the books and the learning is at." Turn to page 15 in your book. Strange environment. But I think that first teacher maybe was right, because there is sort of, I remember how I got into D&D, that in StorySlam affected it. Because I was 10 years old. I'd gone to the mall to buy some books at the Walden Books, which I think says more about my age than anything else, because Walden Books existed, as did malls and books. But I walked in and there was just this big display right in the middle for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I saw that the Monsters Compendium. It was just this white binder. It said Advanced Dungeons and Dragons at the top, and it had 3 monsters like leaping out of the middle. And I'm 10 years old and I see this, I'm like, what is this? I don't know what any of these things are, but this looks like a technical manual, like my dad, who's an engineer, like he has for all these things. Like, I want to know what this is. I want to know all this information, but I'm going to have to work for it, because this says advanced. I'm going to have to go through all these magical grimoires of just basic Dungeons and Dragons before I can get to the advanced ones. And I did. I sat like reading these things constantly, and it just led to more and more. And I was obsessed then with stories and figuring out, how to get further and who the monsters were. And it led me to actually writing my own stories and then trying to write books and becoming an English major, and then here in Philly where I got a graduate degree in English, and now I'm a teacher in a city where the concern with libraries is not that you may have to use them, but that people may not have access to them. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine this weekend from the old hometown. He got out as well. He's a philosophy doctorate in Baltimore. And most of us got out of that little place, but some of us are still there. But they're still playing Dungeons and Dragons because there's something about knowing who the monsters are and knowing where you're supposed to get out from. That gives you the ability to pick up whatever's around and say what you need to say.